let's live a healthier life. Let's produce our food better. Let's clean up our environment. Let's try to avoid cancer. Our national toxicology program here in the U.S., the United Nations, several very important scientific bodies have warned and have told us, the way to a healthier future is not necessarily through better pharmaceuticals, right?
Yeah, for sure.
It's through a healthier way of living and producing food and consuming food and taking care of our environment.
Carey Gillam is my guest on this episode of Inside Ideas, brought to you by 1.5 Media and Innovators magazine. Carey is a veteran journalist, researcher, and writer with more than 25 years of experience in the news industry covering corporate America. Her 2017 book about pesticide dangers, Whitewash, the story of a weed killer, cancer, and the corruption of science, won the 2018 Rachel Carson Book Award from the Society of Environmental Journalists and has become a part of the curriculum in several university environmental health programs. As a former senior correspondent for Reuters International News Service, Gillam specializes in finding the story behind the spin, uncovering both the risks and rewards of the evolving new age of agriculture. Gillam's area of expertise include biotech, crop technology, agrichemicals, and pesticide product development, and the environmental impacts of American food production. Gillam's reporting and writing have led her to become recognized as an international expert on corporate control of agriculture and the health and environmental impacts of a pesticide-dependent food system. She was asked to testify before the European Parliament in 2017 about her findings and was an invited speaker to the World Forum for Democracy in Strasbourg, France in 2019. She also has been featured speaker at many different events throughout North America, Australia, the Netherlands, Brussels, and France. Gillam left Reuters in late 2015, becoming a research director for the nonprofit organization US Right to Know, an investigative group focused on exposing corporate wrongdoings and government failures that threaten the integrity of our food system, our environment, our health. She also writes for The Guardian. She just had an article come out about Mexico, and we'll maybe touch on that a little bit. Gillam resides in Overland Park, Kansas, with her husband and 3 children. Carey, welcome to the show. It's so good to have you here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. That's a long introduction, isn't
Well,
it?
you've been doing this for a while, and I'm so glad to have you, and it's well deserved. I always say, yeah, I could make it shorter, but you've been doing this for a while and been doing very well for a while. And I want to make sure you get your accolades, but I also want our listeners to know, you know, you, you know your stuff. You've been around for a while. You've had the hard fights, and you've also had the hard criticisms, and people come after you in some respects. Kind of touching on that before we go any further, I just had Maria Rodale on the show. She's going to be podcast is going to be released tomorrow from Organic Manifesto. She also received the wonderful Rachel Carson Award, which you received, which is a wonderful accolade and group. But I happen to have Rachel Carson's Silent Springs book here right in front of me, and it is one of the pinnacle books that started out a lot of things. Silent Spring, not only environmental, climate, and also the big thing around DDT, which is a Monsanto issue. I believe you know that I do a lot around global food reform, around our food systems, and working with the United Nations on this UN Food System Summit that will be in New York in September this year, all around how can we fix our food systems to make it better for human health and reduce human suffering, but also for our environmental problems that are occurring. And so the question really is, with all this breadth of experience, writing, the journalism, but actually being right there front and center present with the people who have been involved in all this, we've just experienced 12 months or more of craziness, lockdowns, Black Lives Matters, all sorts of unrest around the world, the inauguration, and real frankly, legal legal issues where people have gotten off the hook for some pretty bad things, going on around the world. Um, this is a beautiful story where that didn't happen. But I want to ask you, how did you weather all this pandemic? Is all that experience say, hey, don't worry, I knew this was coming. I've been reporting on it. I've made it through. But how has this time been for you?
I think, gosh, I don't know that I have been resilient. I think that I have struggled in the ways that many people have, depression, anxiety, concern, fear for yourself, your kids, your family members, that sort of thing. I think what I did early on, maybe that was different than what other people did, is because I've been a journalist for so long, and I find my comfort and my security in data, looking at data, looking at documents, tracking information, because I think that's how what's true. I don't take my truth from talking heads on television news shows. I want to see the data and the documents. And so where I live, in Kansas, early on, I went to the Kansas Health Department website every day and started looking at, all right, who what are the demographics of the people who are getting infected, and what does the death rate look like, and who are the people in, and began to understand pretty quickly that for this was primarily something that affected older individuals, sicker individuals. There was a lot of different characteristics of the disease about who was going to get it more seriously. And that gave me a little bit of comfort that perhaps myself and my family, we weren't going to die if we stepped outside. Similarly, you look at, masking and other things that show, some sort of science. I looked at the science behind the masking, and there was quite a debate early on, but more recently it's been shown that this really does affect the transmission rate. So, I'm going down a rabbit hole here, I guess, but my comfort, as I said, is always found in data and information and facts. And, we've seen a real challenge to that, as you alluded to, with people trying to, cover things up and to lie about things, not necessarily COVID here, but racial matters, political matters, election issues here in the United States. There are all sorts of forces out there that are trying to put forward false information, false narratives, to confuse, to enrage, to drive movements and drive actions. And I think people get caught up in that, and this insecurity, and the sense of fear that's come with the pandemic, with the COVID situation, is causing people to just latch on to whatever they can, to feel that they have some sort of control, I think. And it's been a dangerous time here in the US, and I think around the world. And I think we're not out of it yet. I think we're still there, but goes to the bigger picture. Don't just listen to talking heads on TV. Try to find information for yourself. Try to get to the root. Try to look at the sources as best you can to get data, to get information, to understand, what are the risks, what are the relative, factors that are going to be meaningful to you and to your family, and react in that way. I don't know if that answered your question.
No,
but
it
again,
definitely did, and it's multifaceted. I mean, we're talking months, and I think there's some interesting things that have bubbled up there. One of them, to kind of be more specific and and continue our journey on, is with Whitewash. You didn't have a pandemic to release your book. It wasn't in a lockdown, but the Monsanto Papers are even more a great book, powerful book, great read. So there's some new adjustments. Well, how do you launch a book? How do you talk about such a sensitive topic, and also bring out the reality of those during a time where we're in lockdown and it's, it's all virtual. I think we're doing a pretty good job, and I've seen. I'm glad that you're working with Island Press, a wonderful organization that really helps and does that right. But I mean, that's one thing. The other thing is really the Monsanto papers and what happened to Lee Johnson is really something that's happened many times before. Not only DDT and Agent Orange, but also we had the tobacco industry. We've had other issues with pollution and acid rain and things that have affected human health. And so I'm just wondering, are there any similarities now? COVID, we're talking it could be an encroachment on um, other species, zoonotic species, and things that are bubbling up where humanity is encroaching on certain areas that are unknowns. And maybe it could come out in another 10 years that something there has created some issues worldwide for us. And so I more or less wanted to mainly know what your learnings have been, or how you've been launching a book, talking about these subjects. Did they give you any things where I say, oh, I've kind of talked about this coming out? And so those are all interesting for me to know. And I think you answered it perfectly. But if you have any more to add to that, I'd love to hear it.
Well, in terms of launching a book during a pandemic, oh, gosh, I wish we were. Can you believe it's been almost a year, or has been a year, I guess, since we fell into this. But yeah, I don't know. The book comes out March 2nd. I hope people will read it. It's a story that is was very difficult for me to write. At points, it's a story of one man, Lee Johnson. He was the first. It's a true story. He was the first person to go to trial against Monsanto, the first person to win this, multi-million-dollar verdict by a jury that found that Monsanto's Roundup products indeed do cause cancer and cause Lee's cancer. And Lee has just been someone who's suffered horribly. Middle age, middle income, father of two, just a working guy, just trying to really, pull himself up by the bootstraps and provide a good, solid life for his family. And the story talks about how he, became ill and how ill he got, and his terminal diagnosis, told that he was going to die soon. Having to leave his boys, how he finds a lawyer, and how this case builds and builds and builds, and the secrets that come out through Monsanto's internal documents, and how that became basically a global, story, to the extent that Bayer, which bought Monsanto, is now paying over $11 billion to settle cases like Lee's in the United States. So I think it's a powerful story. It's meaningful for people all over the world. It's told through the lens of Lee's journey, both to fight to stay alive and to fight to bring Monsanto to justice. I'm happy about it, but again, it's coming out on March 2nd, and people have bigger concerns. So I don't know, maybe nobody reads in a pandemic, or maybe everybody reads in a pandemic.
No, they definitely read in a pandemic. A matter of fact, so we're doing a podcast now, and what we've seen was actually seeing podcasts dip as far as listeners, because they're more at home. There's other things. There's more TV, more news, other things, especially
Yeah.
inauguration, no time. But the minute we come out, that podcast will go up. But people have been reading. They've been ordering books like crazy. So physical reads, I don't think you have to worry. And this is such a compelling story, the way you write it, the way you really get us to get to know Lee. And a matter of fact, one of my uncles, great uncles, his name was Lee Johnson, and very similar type of upbringings and as the Lee Johnson in the book. And it was a wonderful read. I love to hear about the story. Very sad, very trying, and a lot of that. But it's important to know that. I also had to deal with Bayer and other legal lawyers on the other side, where I've had to, sue because of my own health, because of things like that. And so I know what a grueling legal battle, pulling back the curtains, and corruption is in that. firsthand, and so it was really interesting to see the success of this story and the papers and what happened and you know what all came out of this was fabulous. I want to, if it's okay with you, just a little bit before kind of almost set up with your prior book, Whitewash, which I read and loved as well. Um, your journey on this was kind of a longer journey with Monsanto, where originally you were almost friends or acquaintances or reporting or as a journalist. Um, Working together with Monsanto. So I sort of say, I don't know if that's the right wording I'm using, but you actually knew the CEO at one time before he became CEO, and there was a little bit of journey behind there, and that you through that process saw there's something else going on. They're asking me to do things that aren't right, or and then it went so far as kind of threats and against you and that. Can you tell us a little bit of how that occurred and then how you even got into going from that into now the Monsanto Papers, and was that really what kind of solidified that no, we definitely need to bring this to the light?
Yeah, so long story. So, I've covered corporate America, as you said in your introduction, pretty much all of my career, 3 decades roughly now. And, so as a journalist, when you cover big companies, I mean, I covered some of the biggest banking companies in America. The company that is now Bank of America. I had the chairman of Bank of America in my face yelling at me. I've had a lot of very powerful business people, men mostly, yell and curse and try to get me to write stories the way they want them to be written. And, I mean, I think that's natural though. Anytime you are challenging the narrative or writing something that doesn't put somebody in the best light, they're going to push back. So that's just to be expected. And as a journalist, that comes with the job, and you just make sure that your facts are always locked down, and that you're fair, and that you present the proper context. um, with Monsanto, when I started covering the company in 1998, they very quickly, it became a little bit of a different animal. They would, woo reporters and bring them to headquarters and, show them around and feed them and, beautiful lunches and things like that, and have events and really try to teach us how to report about their business, and why we should discount information or criticism or science or anything that detracted from how wonderful their products were, and all the great things that they were doing. And so, I mean, I appreciated the education and the information. They taught me a lot about genetically modifying seeds, and the benefits of pesticides and chemicals, and how those two products affected farming practices. I spent a lot of time with farmers, and then I started spending time with scientists and with agronomists and agricultural economists and seed company people. And I've been in thousands of farm fields across America over the years. And so over time it became clear that everything Monsanto was telling me wasn't always the way that things actually worked, and they didn't actually play out on the ground that way. And there were actually a lot of problems developing in the environment and in farm fields, and there was some safety concerns about their herbicides, glyphosate and Roundup and others. And as I followed the story, and as the science evolved, and as I wrote more and more about the science, and the science indicated more and more harm and concern associated with Monsanto's products, Monsanto got pretty upset with me. I work for Reuters, giant, international news organization. My stories went around the world and were read by millions of people. So they really didn't want me to write anything that put their products in a negative light. And they began a campaign to silence me, harass me, intimidate me, get me removed from my beat at Reuters. Just this went on and on and on for years. And we know a little bit of it because internal Monsanto documents that came out through the Roundup litigation speak about Carey Gillam and what a pain in the ass I am, and how they want to get me off my beat. And we have documents showing how they wanted to smear my first book, Whitewash, try to get third-party negative reviews posted that didn't look like they came from Monsanto, but looked like they were independent negative reviews. And it just, a lot has come out about that they spent a lot of time and effort and money to ruin my reputation, to make sure people didn't listen to what I did. They tried to get the Guardian to stop working with me, to stop taking stories. I had a piece in Time magazine about Lee Johnson a couple of years ago. They tried to get the Time magazine editors to stop. It just, any work that I do, they have tried to silence me. And so, yeah,
That
it's been a
means you're
challenge.
on the right track.
It's been a challenge.
Definitely.
Yeah, you usually, if people are trying this hard to tell you to shut up, it usually means you should talk louder. So
Yeah, that's really, and so, I mean, that really, I'd kind of like to take a little bit of a journey on more touching on the food and agriculture as well, and then going more into the book as well. Um, so you've been doing this for a while. You really are good with this. One big proponent, so a big fan, person I'm a big fan of is Bill Nye, the science guy. And for a long time, he was just like, GMOs suck and they're awful and horrible and stay away from them. And during this time, he really just kind of made this transition. He also kind of went to the offices of Monsanto and met with the CEO and had this thing. And he came back and he said, no, GMOs are fine, but I still have this strong feeling that he's really against obviously Roundup and chemicals and seeds and some other things. I think, because it's still kind of a weird feeling. But in my question to you, is there some things that you're willing to share with us about your thoughts and feelings on GMOs and how can maybe a company like now Bayer, Monsanto, or is it, are they still doing good somewhere but doing horrific bad elsewhere? Is it kind of both sides of that coin, or is it really you kind of follow me where I'm going with this? Is this
right.
is there some good in the satanic company, so to say, or is it? Yeah, I mean, I hate to be so rough, but it really is there a silver lining or something good there, or is it really all shit?
I, I would say, and this, Monsanto has said this, Bayer owns Monsanto, if the products didn't work, if they weren't effective, farmers wouldn't buy them, right? So, yes, I mean, genetically engineered crops provide benefits in certain ways. Uh, Many of the benefits with, for instance, with the first genetically engineered crops that Monsanto brought out were weed resistance. They were these Roundup ready crops that corn and cotton and soybeans that farmers could plant, and then they could spray glyphosate or Roundup directly over the growing crops, and the crops wouldn't die, but the weeds would, right? Farmers loved that, loved it. I mean, I remember, it came out in the 90s. I was in farm fields with farmers in the late 90s and early 2000s, and farmers were like, this is the greatest thing ever. This has made my life so much easier. Um, but, you know, what happened was weeds develop resistance. Farmers then are having to spray more and more of the glyphosate. They're having to do more. Some farmers are starting to have to till their ground again. Cotton farmers, in particular in the South, started having real problems with these monster super weeds that they couldn't figure out a way to kill. Their costs are going up. Their yields are going down. Biodiversity, bees and birds and other key pollinators and elements of a healthy environment are starting to be impacted. You're seeing declines in the monarch butterfly because of overuse of glyphosate herbicides. So, things that start out really great, and maybe intentioned really well. I mean, Monsanto's intention was we want to sell a lot of Roundup and we want to sell a lot of these seeds. And farmers' intention was we want our life to be a lot easier. So I don't think that there was evil there, right? I mean, nobody set out to say we want to poison the world. Um, but too much of a good thing can be too much of a good thing. And so you then have weed resistance, you get this pesticide treadmill situation going where more and more herbicides are being applied. The health of the soil is in decline. As I said, you're seeing pollinators in decline. Farmers are not able to see the same yields and production that they were before. Farmers are getting sick because they're being so exposed to so many of these chemicals. Our water and our air is becoming polluted. So yeah, it became a really bad thing. And we now are in a situation, not entirely because of Roundup Ready crops and glyphosate, but a large part of that is due to that. We're now in a situation where we're looking at genetically engineered crops that are being proposed that could tolerate 5 different herbicides. We have crops out there that these companies are encouraging farmers. Well, glyphosate doesn't totally do the job, so we'll spray them with glyphosate and dicamba and 2,4-D. So the levels of pesticide residues in our foods are increasing. So the exposure that families and children have to these pesticides now in their water and their food is increasing. So, I talk about that in my book, Pesticide Treadmill. It's a long way of getting back to, our genetically engineered crops good or bad? The technology itself, a GMO, to me, this is my opinion, is not bad. If you can genetically engineer a crop or something in a way that truly is beneficial, truly is going to be more sustainable and environmentally friendly and not be harmful to the soil or to insects or to humans, or, great, bring it on. That isn't really what we've seen to date.
Yeah.
By far, the vast majority of genetically engineered crops planted around the world right now, the most common trait in them is not, increased nutrition or drought tolerance or, disease resistant. The most planted trait is herbicide tolerance, meaning you can spray the crop with herbicide. That's what it is. So it's not about, the companies talk about, this is about feeding the world, this is about yield gain, this is about helping farmers. It's not. It's really about selling herbicide. So, that's, again, that's for some people, that's great. If you want to sell herbicide, that's a good thing. If you're worried about herbicide in your diet, and in your environment, in your water, not a good thing.
Not
So
a good thing at all. There's these kind of a camp that occurs, or I call it more of a trick. So big corporations, especially chemical companies, tend to, when it comes to environmental human health issues, they tend to push back on the consumers, and they tend to say, they can, especially environmentalists or people concerned about food, they kind of almost plied each other, the consumers or the end people, one against each other. So they'll the vegans against the meat eaters, or they'll the climate scientists against a certain vegan tribe or plant-based tribe, or even regenerative organics, where the real, and I say this all the time about food production, whether it's agriculture, seafood, food and beverage production in general, it's not about the brands or the food products of the future, or whether they're some food tribe, whether they're GMO, non-GMO, vegan, raw, whatever. It's more about the way that we produce food that will have the biggest impact on human health and on our environment if we don't use chemicals, pesticides, aromas, flavors, sugars, on, preservatives, as well as those finite resources that are not really seeing the true cost or the total environmental cost being calculated into those products. We're actually turning food into a commodity, which is a whole nother story in and of itself. But so if we didn't produce them in a certain way, then we wouldn't have those problems on the back end or on the farm to fork end, so to say.
yeah, exactly. And I hope anyway, more and more people are becoming aware of that, or becoming, foodies, or maybe that's not the right term, but educated on food policy, because it is so much more than just, opening your cabinet and pulling out something to eat. It's the food that we consume, that we feed our kids, is foundational to the health of our bodies, to our ability to weather COVID, to weather viruses, to not develop heart disease, or, certain cancers and things like that. I mean, the the better quality, the more nutritious, the cleaner the food we eat, the healthier we can be. And to your point as well, the health of the environment is also very much dependent upon how we grow our food, the inputs we use, the pesticides that we apply, the farming practices, that are used. So it's all critically important to our health, to the sustainability, of the future for our kids. What kind of environment do we want them to be living in 20, 30, 40 years from now? So many people out there are so sick. You look at the fact that, what is it, roughly 1 in 3 people in the US right now are expected to get cancer in their lifetimes. My father died of cancer in October. I can look up and down my street, thank you, and see families who've been impacted by cancer, children, teenagers, my son's friend. Cancer is something we're being told we just need to live with. Many other diseases, and thankfully we are getting better at treating this and helping people survive cancer. But let's live a healthier life. Let's produce our food better. Let's clean up our environment. Let's try to avoid cancer. Our national toxicology program here in the US, the United Nations, several very important scientific bodies have warned and have told us, the way to a healthier future is not necessarily through better pharmaceuticals, right?
Yeah, for sure.
It's through a healthier way of living and producing food and consuming food and taking care of our environment. So,
I'm definitely glad that you're saying that.
Well, yeah, and that's the bigger message of both of my books and of all of the work that I do. It's not corporations are evil. It's we need this knowledge so that we can work towards policies that will better protect our children in the future.
Yeah, my mother also passed away from several forms of cancer as well, 2011. But I come from my mother's side, from 6 generations of farmers and Germany's largest organic farmers. And so thank goodness we had a different view and look at chemicals and pesticides, even though, Bayer is a big kind of a company, and some of the chemicals that were very much developed in Europe for farming and things. So I kind of see that correlation. For me, food is really our humanity's basic energy source. If you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the bottom 2 layers are breathing, food, and water. Security of body, security of environment, health, and land. For me, those are basic energy sources. So I'm really concerned about what types of food I put in my body. And I hate the word, or not hate, but I don't like the word foodie either, but I kind of am. I love food, and I love especially good, healthy, tasting food, good for someone. And so I also kind of see that play of that, and that important role that it takes. This story of the Monsanto Papers, which is really about the papers from the trial report, is that kind of correct? It is also the story of Lee Johnson, and not only the horrible day where an event happened to him where he
Yeah,
more or
poison.
less, yeah, poisoned himself, and led to him having cancer, and then luckily found a wonderful man who had the opportunity to listen and say, well, I'll represent you, I'll take this. And then it just, in some respects, it's amazing the great hands of cards, or the great things that fell into place that would happen, because it is a battle, regardless of how well it was, and how he got the right people on board, and how people stood behind him and fought for that. It was an enormous battle, and you so eloquently in this book really get that out behind the scenes of writing that, and bringing this out, and that story. Are you there, right, hand in hand this whole time going on this journey? How did that come to you to put into this whole process?
Yeah, I was very much so. after I wrote Whitewash, or after Whitewash came out, the litigation was really just coming together. Lawsuits had been filed because of the World Health Organization, IARC, declaring glyphosate as a probable human carcinogen. And then my book came out and laid out all the deceptive tactics of Monsanto and the collusion with the EPA and that sort of thing. Documents that I had obtained through Freedom of Information Act requests and just reporting for several years. So a lot of the lawyers in the cases wanted, to learn from me a little bit at the beginning. They didn't, so they were looking to whitewash and they wanted to talk to me. And I just, I sort of followed along with the litigation and got to know the lawyers, the lead attorneys involved in the nationwide mass tort litigation. And they were generous enough with their time to really, kind of let me in behind the scenes a little bit. Let me sort of see how, how this litigation comes together, how the cake is made or sausage
Yeah.
is made. Maybe that's what you described. So, and I think to me, like that's one of the most interesting parts of the book is not necessarily just, Monsanto's secrets revealed and Lee's story, but also how this machine, this litigation machine actually works. Because, there's a lot of good, bad, and ugly in there. There's a lot of maneuvering and strategy and on both sides. And that to me was really compelling stuff to watch it unfold. And that's why I wanted to put it in a book. Because I think even if you take Monsanto out of this and you take Lee out of this, this is still a very representative story of the situation in America and many other countries where our regulators are not holding companies accountable. Our regulators have really dropped the ball on that. And if people are injured through a chemical or a medical device or, opioid overuse or, some such product that's really being pushed by a very powerful company, almost the only avenue for justice is through this litigation system. And it probably shouldn't be that way. It's messy. It's very imperfect. Lawyers make a lot of money. People who are injured usually don't make a lot of money through this process and end up, confused and concerned and disappointed in a lot of cases. But it's really the only way we see to hold companies accountable and to try to affect change. And I think that's a system that needs to be reformed as well. I think we need more, teeth in our regulatory system, so you wouldn't have to rely on lawyers like the lawyers in the Lee Johnson case. And you also see in this book, the thing that I also found fascinating is, some of them sit on the sidelines. There's some plaintiffs' attorneys out there that bring in cases and sit on the sidelines and wait for a settlement. But there are others who literally put their lives on the line and their financial stability on the line, and they have to put up millions of dollars of their own money and take out loans and all sorts of things to try to bring these cases all the way to trial. And if they lose, they get nothing. They're wiped out. So, there's a lot of drama, I guess, in all of that. And that I tried to pack all of that into this book.
Yeah, you definitely did a wonderful job to pack it in there. I would only say it's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears on one side, definitely going into saying, I'm going to take this case, we're going to take the battle, we're going to do it. And there was a point in time, and I don't want to be a spoiler of anything, but where one of the Monsanto person retires, and it's kind of a point in time where there's a lot of discovery and things are discovered in there through that retirement, some things that he said publicly. And but there's just along the way there are so many things. Why? I guess what I'm getting to is the real question of, there's so much money. That's not even their core business. Their core business is chemicals and agriculture and seeds but they're spending almost as much, if not more, on the payouts of the court losses, but also on the attorneys to protect and defend and to go after you, to go after others who say, hey, there's something wrong with this system. We've got to fix this. Let's get some better regulation. They're working in conjunction with the EPA. I mean, um, how do we flip the paradigm, or what is, you mentioned that you want to see a change with better regulation or better things. How do we do that when the business as usual model, or the model that they've been working on, is we've got to have a good legal, we've got to have a good amount of money for risk or mitigation, basically, for climate, to pay our fees for environmental problems that we have, or for lawyers. How do we
Yeah.
get to a better system?
Yeah. Well, I think the people, number one, have to become informed, right? People have to know what's going on out there, and how corporations are increasingly wielding their influence. The story that came out recently in The Guardian that I did was about Mexico. The president of Mexico and others in the administration have declared that they will ban glyphosate and GMO imports. They don't want it in their country. They have said this will be better for the environment and for our people. We want a more sustainable form of agriculture in our country. And the story is based on internal emails and other communications that were obtained from the US Trade Representative and EPA and other US federal agencies, showing that they are working very closely with Bayer and with certain other big chemical companies to try to pressure Mexico into not banning these things, and to intimidate Mexico into changing its mind. And I had done a story a year or so ago about, they did the same thing with Thailand. Thailand tried to ban glyphosate, and these big companies in the United States government got together and put the squeeze on Thailand, and Thailand dropped its plans for a ban. So, countries are, people around the world are becoming more engaged, are becoming informed, and they're trying to do things and implement policies that are more beneficial and more healthy for their populace. Um, but it's a big fight. You've
It is
got
a huge fight. I mean,
very,
you have
yeah,
to wrap your mind around it. It's almost unfathomable that we're talking country level manipulation from a corporation that, the big impacts of a country now saying we're not going to use these chemicals, and the force, the manipulation that's used there to try to do that. I currently I just did an article myself as well, and a little documentary with Croatia, on how they have huge issues with using chemicals and pesticides and fertilizers, and even trying to make that organic move transfer. And they're getting a lot of pushback also from the farmers, and they're like, yeah, show me something that works, show me something that's an alternative, or something that works. This is what works, and this is how we'll do it. And
yeah,
so
yeah. And I got, I got an email yesterday, I think it was from a journalist in Colombia, who said this is, the US government is pressuring, and this has been going on for years, and we've written about this, but the US government really wants Colombia to be using glyphosate sprayed aerially, aerially, am I saying it right? From the
aerosol,
air,
yeah, yeah.
aerial spraying, to eradicate cocoa plants, to try to stem the drug trade. And this has been going on, because this spraying from the sky of this herbicide has been shown to be harmful to people who live, in the area, and who've been exposed in this way through no, direct fault of their own, no, voluntary exposure, certainly. So Colombia, tried to pull back on that, and the US has been pressuring them and been on them as well not to do that, to keep spraying glyphosate from the sky over these wide swaths of land there, despite the injury that's been shown to people who live in the area. So, it's, as I said, it's a very big fight. I don't know how you really get about it. I mean, as a journalist, my role is to bring information to light, and then let other people carry the ball, and hopefully affect change at some point.
That, yeah, I hate when we have this feeling of hopelessness. So is there like any hope that you can give, like if someone were to approach you with, say this is going on at a country level, or somewhere, you say, that, I'm a journalist, I got to report the facts and the data, and I want to try to, stay out of that fight. But here are some people actively working on the good side of it, or working on, the direct reporting or the litigation on these. Please go and seek them out. Because I think it's kind of hard in some respects to find those right litigators, whether you're doing environmental or climate litigation, whether you're doing food litigation, trying to mess with the Food and Drug Administration, or whether it's the EPA. How do you find the right people who can kind of help you in that? Is there a compendium or a lexicon or somewhere where you can say, okay, here we have some people on the same wavelength that we need to look a little bit deeper,
Yeah, I mean, I guess I know so many of those people. I'm not quite sure if you didn't know them, if you could just start looking on Google, probably so. I mean, there are so many organizations. Here in the U.S., there's Center for Food Safety is a really impressive organization that is run by lawyers, and they, try their best to hold our regulators accountable. And if they see them violating the law, which they have many times, they file a lawsuit and say, you're violating the law. I mean, this recently happened with dicamba, which is an herbicide that Monsanto, Bayer, and other companies have been pushing for farmers to use because glyphosate is not as effective anymore. And, it was determined after a lawsuit that the EPA, our Environmental Protection Agency here in the US, did in fact, skip over several provisions, several requirements of the law when they granted approval to this use of dicamba by these very big companies, BASF and Corteva and Monsanto, Bayer. So, that's been an interesting battle too. But, there's Center for Biological Diversity and Greenpeace, and I don't know, it seems like
I would say even Rodale Institute
Rodale is doing
yeah,
great work to show, the benefits of regenerative agriculture and how you can achieve that. And there are farmers I've written about here in the United States, hundreds of them, who have formed their own idea network, they call themselves, to do experiments in their fields, what works and what doesn't work in terms of crop rotation and cover crops and row spacing and different, use of different seeds and, that sort of thing, to try to really move away from pesticide dependence. So, there's applause for lots of different groups and individuals, I think.
Well, both the foundations I work with in Croatia, I'll definitely let them know they need to read both of your books and get a little page, because they're really trying to get their ministries and their government to change some of the farm bills, change some of the ways they use chemicals and pesticides. That's kind of their big mission, and switch more to an organic. So that's always nice to know. And other shining stories of what's bubbled to the
Yeah.
surface.
And there's great, so, and I guess I should, US Right to Know, the group that I do research and do FOIAs for, we put a lot of, all we really do is file freedom of information or state open records requests, and then try to share those documents with the public or other journalists or lawmakers, to try to bring information to light. There's a great group that I'm getting more familiar with, the Heartland Health Research Alliance. They're actually doing research looking at reproductive effects of herbicide exposure. Since we have all of this herbicide use, I've been talking about this pesticide dependence, glyphosate and dicamba and 2,4-D, because there's early evidence that exposure, can really relate to reproductive problems and adverse birth outcomes. So, women and their babies, what more important concern is there? So there are groups like that are really, I think, doing research and trying to understand the risks that we face and what are the solutions. And, so if you're interested, there are people out there. There are ways to educate yourself.
What would you say your biggest hope is with the Monsanto papers as a takeaway for your future readers when the book comes out? What your real desire and hope is that they get out of the read?
Oh my goodness, that's a good question. Well, I hope that they are moved by it. I mean, I guess as I was. My editor said when she read the epilogue, every time she read it, she cried. And when I wrote it, I cried. I don't know. I hope they're moved because again, it's a really big issue and maybe a there's a lot of technical stuff and science stuff and legal stuff, but at the very heart of it, it's a story about one person and lots of people whose lives are just being turned upside down and destroyed by cancer, and cancer that has been shown to be caused by this product, by this company's product that they've been pushing for 40 years. So, it's a warning tale. It's a story of a cautionary tale, I guess, of, and it's not just one company. It's not just one product. This is going on over and over and over and over again.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, that's what I like as well. I mean, to just kind of show this is not a new story. I mean, there's
Right.
saccharin, DDT, Agent Orange, but there's also other companies. Johnson's and Johnson's baby powder was a big
Right.
issue, and so many others where the product they're producing given to pretty much anyone to use and to eat and consume or to put on food that we eat. It's a big deal. So I'm glad that you wrote it. I love it, and I'm going to recommend it to everybody. And I definitely get. Hopefully one day when I get the physical copy, I can get a signed copy from you live. I'll come over to Missouri or where you
Kansas.
live. Yeah,
Kansas.
Kansas, and we'll get it signed. I have some real questions that are also tied to this as well. Do you consider yourself to be a global citizen, and how would you feel about a world without nations, borders, and divisions of humanity, one from another?
My goodness, I've never thought of that. I don't know. I've never thought of that. I guess I just off the top, I mean, I appreciate so much the distinctions that are found in different countries, and I haven't traveled maybe as extensively as you have. I've been to several different, many countries throughout Europe and to Australia and other places. And I love the richness of the different cultures and the different languages and the different foods and the different ways of looking at life. And I always find that I learn from that and I feel enriched. So I guess I really appreciate distinctions. I wouldn't want to live in a world where those were all blurred, by any means.
Well, I'll caveat why I mentioned that. So uh, I definitely do not want a world where cultures go away. I personally would want one where divisions of humanity, one from each other, would go away, where we're locked down, we're divided amongst ourselves. I'd like to see more world where we're all global citizens on this spaceship Earth. But the reason I ask you is during this time where we've been in lockdown, where we've been in this crazy time, there the things that have been the global citizens is the pandemic, is air, water, food has been a global citizen, traveling all over the world, to keep people fed, and species don't see borders. But us as humans, we've kind of been locked up in our human zoos and kept away from each other. This whole pandemic, they say started in Wuhan and because of bats, wet market, zoonosis, whatever it was, but it spread all over the world. It was basically a global citizen. So I think that the way we're interacting with our earth, with our biome, with each other, this division and, blaming it on China, blaming it on the US, things like this, it's not a system that's working for us. And so that was more for the question of, are you a global citizen? How would you feel about a world, without divisions, borders of humanity, one from another, not necessarily cultures, because
Yeah.
richness of food, richness of those languages and those cultures and even belief systems is okay. But I have a lot of family in the U.S. I'm in Hamburg, Germany right now. I have family in Europe and Asia, and so it's interesting,
Mhm.
to know that we're all on the same spaceship Earth.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a beautiful point, and you're right. And I do think, what we've just seen in America, the little place where I live, you can be as small or as large as you want and still understand that when you separate people, and you create division and you create fear of each other, it is a recipe for, real problems. And it's a perfect situation, incubation for a takeover, for a power taking by large government bodies or large corporations. Or so when we do become fearful of each other or divided, whether it be by, boundaries or lockdowns or restrictions on travel or anything else. I mean, yeah, it definitely can lead to a demise, I think, in society. And, that's what we're seeing right now. So, yeah, I don't know. If you erase borders, what happens? I don't know. But I definitely would agree with you. We need to erase the separation and the division and the fear of one another.
I totally agree. And I'm kind of leading you in questions because I have a couple more. The next one's going to be the hardest, but
Okay.
another along that same lines of thought. So this is interesting. Greta Thunberg, I guess how they say it in English, but Swedish Thunberg. She sailed across, got to the U.S. and was in a hearing with a bunch of other youth who were filing a complaint to sue the government for environmental damages, things like that. And she was kind of being spoken to by some representatives, Democrats and Republicans. And this one Republican, before it came to his chance to say anything, he was on his iPhone. You could tell it was the iPhone. He was texting, looking at something while the Democrat was asking the question. And then it came time for him to ask the question. And he asked, Greta Thunberg, how she feels about all the coal power plants coming up in China and all the pollutions and emissions. And we need to worry about China and not worry about the US. The US is doing just fine. And so we tend to take this global citizen approach and kind of divide ourselves. That's their problem. They need to get their environment in line or their chemical use in line, and it's not our problem. We're doing just fine. And it kind of blurs the borders of global citizen, but also trade, because if you look at a trade map of our world, how trade in goods, food, and chemicals and things flow throughout our world, they are a global citizen. They are already globally moving around, being used everywhere. And that iPhone that Republican had in his hand was made in China. And so he's complaining, bitching, and moaning about the waste and the pollution, the environmental impact that occurred in China, but it's okay for him to use it and then blame that they don't want to take our trash anymore. But it's not just US, China, it's all over the world. It's going like that. Bolsonaro, it's, whoever is, we don't understand that, without this world and supplying each other with these things, and that there's this interaction, that there isn't the allotment to point fingers and divide ourselves from it. It's just it's their fault or they're doing bad.
Yeah.
Brexit was another great one. The big vote on Brexit was really to do with immigrant workers and a racial issue, why they voted on that. And then during the lockdown, none of those immigrant workers were there to harvest the food. And so we had huge food waste and huge food problems in the United Kingdom. Based upon a vote, which was crazy, and we have that going on. So that's kind of way I frame that, to see how because the next burning question is so crazy. It's the burning question, WTF, and it's not the swear word, although we probably were doing that during this last 12 months. It's what's the future? And so I want to know is, what's the future? What does a world that works for everyone look like for you? How can we stop making the same mistakes we are? Wisdom's in your book, and to move forward to better models. So I want to know from you, what's the future?
Well, now that you've laid out all that darkness, it's hard to speak, I guess, optimistically. I setting aside the pandemic, because I think that has turned everything upside down. And when I say the pandemic, I'm not only talking about this march of this virus, but of the government reaction to it. And I am very much a believer that it's been a government overreach. I think civil liberties have been stripped of people without due process and without great thought, I guess, on the part of our government. And a lot of it is there's little logic to it, it seems. Here in Kansas, my children have not been able to go to school, but if I want to go buy a gun, I can certainly do that, or a bottle of tequila, or I can go to a bar in Kansas. I don't. I go to restaurants, but my kids can't go to school. I don't understand the logic of that. I don't think it's logical.
Is that almost an oxymoron?
My son recently was told by his university he and several hundred other students are banned from campus, are banned from the university that we've paid thousands of dollars for, because someone said that they saw them at some time not wearing a mask, but there's no definitive allegation of it, and there's no due process for them to defend themselves from this charge. If they show up on campus, they'll be arrested. The university has told them. Okay. What what world are we living in here? Where we're threatening to arrest college kids if they try to go to class. So I guess I'm going down a rabbit hole here. I think if we continue down the path we're on, where we just say governments can tell us who can be in business and who can't, and who can associate with a friend or who can't, or who can see their family member or who can't. I shouldn't have been seeing my elderly father in the last months of his life, according to, my government leaders. But I'm so glad that I did. I'm so glad I didn't listen to them, and that I brought him into my home, and that I spent the last, days with him. So right now, I guess I feel like if we continue down this path where we all just say, sure, government, tell us how to live and tell us how to be divided and fearful of one another, and these powerful players will dictate our future. No, it's not a very good WTF or whatever. But if people are informed and engaged and take personal responsibility and act upon the best nature that we have, we can't just be acting selfishly. We have to be looking out for ourselves, our children, their future, our neighbors. We have to do our best to protect ourselves, obviously, from ill health, but that takes many forms. It's not just a virus. There are many, many, many aspects of human health and mental health and economic health, so that people are not homeless in the streets and starving and cold.
I love that.
I mean, there needs to be a balance in everything. I guess I've said this all along. I don't ever see things really as black and white. I see nuance, and I see balance, and I see gray, and we have to embrace that and understand that and do our best to navigate that, but navigate it in a way that is best for all of us, and protects us and nurtures our children and nurtures our environment, so we can have a happy and healthy future. And right now, that's not where we are. I don't think.
Yeah, that sounds like exactly what I said. It sounds like a world that works for everyone. There's no one size fits all. It's kind of individualized from where you're at, what your situation is, age, gender, location, job, whatever it is, that it's kind of more personalized, because that it maybe works well for some, but not for everyone. And I really liked how you put that. That was great. So that was the hardest question, and I know that was I ask every one of my guests that, but I appreciate your journalistic, very honest answer to that. The last three questions are really, really easy. You're going to do great. For my guests and my listeners, first and foremost, if there was one message that you could depart to them as a sustainable takeaway that had the power to change their life, what would it be, your message?
Food and exercise, right? I mean, I don't know. That seems so simple, and maybe not the high level answer you're looking for. I think take care of your health, right? Take care of your family's health. Care about the food that you eat. Care about the food that you put in your body, and exercise. Our health is so core to everything. We can't be good citizens in the world. We can't take care of our kids. We can't, if we're not in good health. So, what this takes us back to where we started this conversation. Food is foundational. Care about it, research it, know where your meat and eggs and vegetables and things are coming from. Organic, food that uses less pesticide is better for the environment, better for biodiversity, better for our health. I mean, that's been shown over and over and over again. It's not perfect. It's not a perfect system. Doesn't mean you're perfectly clean. Doesn't mean there aren't any pesticide residues in, that head of organic kale or spinach or whatever it is you're getting. But it does mean it's better. Just do your research and care about yourself and care about your health and your family.
What should young journalists in your field be thinking about if they're looking for ways to make real impact?
I guess I would say data and documents. Doesn't matter what somebody tells you, getting a good quote that, you need a good quote for a story, but stories need, when you're writing about an important issue, you need to get to the heart of the matter. You need to see data, you need to see documents, you need to talk to people who are impacted. You need to really follow up and do your research and not just, be writing up press releases that come out and swallowing them whole as though they're true. Our job as journalists is to ask questions, to hold people to account, to try to get to the truth as best we can in as many different ways as we can. And we're going to make mistakes, and you're not always going to get there. And sometimes you do have to write up the press release, but the larger body of your work should be, independent of all of these voices telling you what to write. It should be finding the truth and then bringing that truth to light.
What have you experienced or learned in your professional journey so far that you would have loved to know from the start?
Golly, I don't know.
A lot of people say I couldn't have learned it because I liked the journey. I needed the
I
journey
know. I mean,
to have that learning.
that's kind of how I feel. I mean, I love being a journalist. I think it's the best job in the world. I think I'm the luckiest person to be able to have spent, my adult life doing this work. I basically get paid to learn about really interesting and important issues and people, and then share that with other people. And you know, so I don't know. I guess maybe the lesson is don't sweat the small stuff. Things that I've spent so much time and energy being anxious or upset about or worried or concerned about, you just keep on putting one foot in front of the other and just keep on going. And the only way out is through, I think is a saying I, live by. So you just keep going.
That's absolutely wonderful. I would like to ask you one last thing, and that's really on the Monsanto Papers, Deadly Secrets, Corporate Corruption, and One Man's Search for Justice. Really, my question is for you, is there anything that we haven't touched or talked about today that my listeners absolutely should know? And again, give us the exact date of the release. My listeners I'm always fortunate. I get a little bit of pre-look at your book, and so we can have a discussion on it. But it is a great read, and it also, for those who are farmers thinking about food, it really sheds new light on how kind of the wrong models have worked in the past, but it also gives a good insight on hope. And for me, it was a big hope. I mean, that was a big some big payouts have been made lately. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. So the book comes out March 2nd. And I guess I would just say, since you're giving me the opportunity, maybe a shout out to Lee Johnson and his story. So he's just an amazing person. And it took me a while to sort of dig through these layers to get to that. He's a very standoffish, sort of quiet and very private person. But his battle with cancer has been really remarkable to watch. And from the doctors who told him, in 2017, I think it was, you have basically 18 months to live, get your affairs in order. And the suffering that he's gone through, some of the wounds on his body, the cancer manifested on his skin and his body, and he had tumors and things all over his body. And I remember being with him one time, and he was showing me his foot, and he didn't never want to show me his foot, but he finally did. And the open wound, and it was open all the way. You could see the bone through, and it was just horrendous. And his flesh would just fall off of it.
Yeah.
The man has suffered incredibly, and yet he has said from day one, you know what? I'm just not going to die. The doctors have all told me I'm going to die. Everybody thinks I'm going to die. My body is just falling apart right and left, and it's excruciating every day. But you know what? I'm just not going to die. And here he is. It's 2021, and he is just still out there. He's still in pain. He's still struggling, but he's also still there with his boys, and he's taking care of them, and he's trying to be a good father to them. And it's that, I guess, level of sort of hope and optimism and internal soulful strength, is just amazing to me. And perhaps that's, the bigger message of hope, that there's always hope.
Thank you so much, Carey. It's been a sheer pleasure. That's all I have for you today, and I really appreciate your time.
Thank you. I appreciate your time too. Thank you so much.